I was speaking, but can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes,
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 doctor.
yes,
Yeah,
doctor.
so
We can hear you.
let me continue. So the influence of environment to the personality. So I was discussing a while ago, environment may play a role in the development of your personality. So let's try to look into shared environment. The resemblance in personality between family members is stronger than it is given the combined effects of genetic factors and shared environment. So it has an influence, rather, all right? What about unshared environment? The aspects of the environment that differ between family members, with each new birth, the family environment actually changes. So this is exactly the main point. If one of the sibling grows in the United States and the other sibling is growing in the Middle East, definitely there will be a significant differences in terms of characteristics. This is the main point that I'm trying to discuss here. Maybe uh, the person in the United States may be more outgoing than the person in the United Arab Emirates. Look into the fact that they are siblings. This is the main point in the influence of the environment in your personality. What about time? So the origins of personality in terms of time. So let's look into age. Accordingly, Sigmund Freud mentioned that personality could have been developed at the age of 7. Eric Erikson through lifetime. Other psychologists actually differ in terms of age. But here, the older a person is, the more consistent his or her personality is over time. So there is a period of stability with your traits, characteristics, and your personality could already be identifiable to yours. That's the period of stability. Let's say 21 years of age, 25. There is no doubt that the characteristics may always be associated to you. Okay? Now, in terms of the increased consistency, as people age can be observed cross-culturally. So there is no doubt. If you grow to become an adult, maybe in the United States, maybe the United Arab Emirates, your personality and other characteristics could have been stabilized at a certain age, in contradiction to what Sigmund Freud was actually telling. So there is no point of stabilization other than personality could have been established at the age of 7, nothing else. You cannot change it. Other psychologists point that you may change and you may at one point achieve the point of stabilization or the point of stability, let's say when you are of age already. What about the cohort? Now, the anxiety levels appear to be increasing over the past generations as you grow old. So that's the thing. This is obviously exactly the main point here. Now, if you're going to observe your timeline as you develop, when you are children, you're carefree. Anxiety may be the last thing that is coming into your mind. When you are going into adulthood, adolescence, the same way. But when you are going toward responsibility, that will be the time that anxiety will already be on the roof, will already be increased. Because you're going to worry about your job, your stability at home, your family, among others. And at one point, you reach your plateau and anxiety will go down also. Anxiety level may actually be going up. It depends on your age and it will stabilize also and it will go down. The level of anxiety may differ from age to age. That is exactly the main point here. But accordingly, again, if you're going to look back on the main point that was expounded by Sigmund Freud, anxiety uh, knows no boundaries. Anxiety knows no age level. Anxiety may be present among children. Anxiety may be present among adolescents, among adults, and at the same time among old age people. So this is exactly what we have here. Moving forward, now, psychologists view personality as if this is something that is very mysterious because they cannot come out with certain definition. they cannot come out with a consensus on how to define it. Until now, this is still an enigma, a mystery that seems to be very difficult to solve. This is a phenomenon that is very difficult to solve. Actually, that's human nature, no? So we are not just different from each other. How come? Siblings, brothers and sisters, twins may be different. How come? The same people are different depending on the situation. I was always telling in the class that as long as we occupy different space, we are different. That's the laws of physics. No similar object will occupy the same space. Therefore, the experience will be different. That makes it significant. No? Our experiences will make up our own personality. This is very, very significant. Okay? So therefore, we experience differently. Even though we are siblings, our experience will be different. That's the reason why the way we develop our traits, the way we develop our characteristics, our behavior, and our personality would differ. Although we are coming from similar parents, our personality truly will be different. That's exactly the main point here. Now, we are complex creatures, and this area of research is very challenging until now. Personality psychology is at its young stage. So a lot of researches are going to be conducted based on this. This is really a phenomenon. See, imagine siblings, twins that separated at birth, or maybe separated when they are young. One goes to Europe, one goes to America. Differently, they will be totally different people, different persons once they see one another. That is the main point, because the way they develop their experiences, the way they develop their personality would totally be different from one another. That is the main point here. Now, significantly, in order to help ourselves, to help psychologists, and to help other people, we need to understand and to know really what kind of personality, significant personality that a person is actually in front of us, that we are dealing with, who we need to assess. So there are so many standardized tests that we are actually using in order to assess personality type of every individual that we encounter. Only psychologists are allowed to do that. In fact, I believe you have already done your personality test when you join the university. Miss Carol give you that one, no? Usually what we give in the university is what we call a 16PF, or that's what we call a 16 personality profile. But there are other personality tests that could be given to all students, all people, no? In order to assess and find out what personality type you are, so that we can know, or will be able to know, or will have some basis to deal with you and to understand you. Personality assessment is always never easy. This is a very tricky business, because creating assessment that seems accurate is easy, but it's difficult to identify what type of person is. It will be very different. Now, I'm going to give you an example. The first time I took at my test, personality test, I was significantly under introverted type of person. But of course, now as I grew up, I start to question that. You see, there is always what we call as cloudiness. It's always unclear if a particular assessment tool gives accurate results. It will just give you an idea, but the result may be doubtful at that, no? So profiles produced by popular and well-regarded personality assessment tools suffer to some extent from what we call as the Barnum effect, you see? Because the reading will be different from what you have as a result of your personality assessment. So that's exactly the main point here. Now, all the personality tests are standardized tests. What is actually the meaning of this? The test, like 16PF that I actually give you, has been developed by psychologists. It could have been tested among age group. Therefore, if you tested that among age group, that would only be relevant to that age group. if you're going to use that among specific population, that would always be relevant to specific population, but not general population, but not general age group. That's the meaning of standardized tests. See, it requires lots and lots of studies in this case, right? So we have one example of a standardized test, as I gave you, 16PF, or the other one that is actually very commonly used is MMPI, or what we call as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is a test that will actually generate some sort of reading and understanding of what kind of person you are. Okay, the MMPI uses a series of 567 true-false questions, and in between maybe. So there are always 3 choices. So that's exactly the main point. So it's a long examination that will be given to you, maybe around 3 hours, no? So what do they measure? They measure the dimensions of personality such as sociability and conscientiousness. Specific only your sociability and your conscientiousness. MMPI also used to detect pathologic conditions, clinical conditions, like in the case of depression and personality disorder, as well as psychosis. That's what we derive from that when we give it, no? So it will give us the main point on what is actually the person is thinking, on who the person is. All right, moving forward, the MMPI was flawed, but nonetheless yielded a test that was useful in practice. I cannot say that all the examinations and tests given to you are highly regarded and correct. There is always a flaw. You know, as I mentioned to you, look at what happened to Sigmund Freud. He presented this idea, he presented as if it was a product of scientific studies. But eventually it was proven that his ideas would always be flawed because he used only his own interpretation, subjective interpretation on the problem that he encountered. The same way with the standardized tests. There will be a manifestation that it could have been objectively done, but unfortunately, most of the assessments that we have could only be, or there will always be some biases that would always be associated with the standardized test that was actually given, right? So moving forward, it becomes the personality test would always be flawed in any way because maybe the developer could have designed questions very poorly, that questions were poorly written, among others. Okay, and we would not always consider that there would always be change as we encounter, as we grow, or as we improve, no? As we develop, as there are so many improvements that are actually happening all around us, influencing our type of personality, influencing our behavior, like the advent of social media, definitely, you know. So the advent of social media would always make some of, or most of the personalities given to us a suspect, you know. So there are people who do not want to go out because they would always connect with other people in the social media, among others. You cannot isolate yourselves because of the existence of social media. That's the thing. And in fact, there are so many people who love themselves so much, they really would like to have a selfie a lot. Social media, they post it on Facebook and other social media platforms. So that's exactly our main point here. Right now, the current personality tests that we use are devoid of this. We were not able to consider about this technological advancement that we actually encountered in the last 10 years. Okay? So, MMPI would always be considered as inaccurate. No? Now, another one, of course, people may fake the test. Like for instance, no, me, if I'm going to test, if I'm going to take the personality test, I will fake it because I know already exactly how to read it, how to get it. Or people who took the personality test on a very short period of time. Maybe the person could have taken today, and maybe next month he could have taken that again. So faking the standardized test is always very prevalent. Or somewhat the answers that you are actually choosing when you are selecting or reading the items, including the personality test, would always be something like somewhat some like it's true to you, but totally it's not true supposed to be, because most of the time some of the choices that we have in the standardized test would only be answerable by true or false and maybe. And sometimes we are always telling our students that if you're going to take a personality test, you do not be staying in the middle. Or else, if you're going to do that, your examination will be flawed, your examination will be meaningless. So either you're going to answer true or false. But most of the time, sometimes they justify. Students justify. People justify the answer. So instead of selecting or true to what they are answering, they fake it in any way. So they choose rather the answer that they think would be acceptable to people. That is the thing, no? Now the MPI is very helpful. This is Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, no? The MPI is useful for research psychologists who study personality, but somehow it does not speak accurately on what type of personality the person who took it. No? This is also useful to clinical psychologists in familiarizing themselves with and planning treatment for clients. Because as I mentioned to you earlier, NMPI may be useful in order to make diagnostic evaluation to patients who would have suffered depression and psychotic disorder, or we call it psychosis. Okay? So moving forward, the NEO-PIR, or this is actually what we call as the NEO Personality Inventory revised, is based on the Big Five traits theory. We have in the Big Five theory about conscientiousness, among others. Now the NEO-PIR has 240 items intended to measure the 5 major traits in the Big Five that I discussed to you earlier. And this is always in 5-point Likert scale. No? The test has good reliability and works well cross-culturally. That means to say that truthfulness may be similar to whatever culture you may belong to. Okay? So another very important test that we may give is the MBTI. I like this one because we are trying to compartmentalize people or those who are actually taking it. Now, what do we have here? Now, this is a test of personality according to Jungian model. Carl Jung, no? It is brief and easy to administer and is very popular, of course, with businesses and other industries. But of course, critics claim that the types identified by administering MBTI are subject to Barnum effect, that is faking effect. Barnum effect means faking effect. Anybody may fake their answers. Remember, in personality test, there is no right or wrong answer. But the moment that you're going to answer it, this is supposed to be relevant to you. It is supposed to be true to you. But unfortunately, sometimes people would always fake it. People, takers, would always not true to themselves. So they may fake it. Sometimes they do not understand the question or the items or what's being asked. So they just encircle or answer true to me or not true to me. That's exactly the main point here. Another very important personality test that we have is what we call as the projective techniques or projective tests. Now, projective test tends to inventory people who may suffer psychotic disorders. It will actually tell you if you are having some sort of pathologic condition. Okay, so that's the thing. Like in the case of Rothschild's ink blots. In here, we'll just show you some sort of black and white picture. Then you have to interpret that. So this is a series of 10 ambiguous ink blots. It's like a picture. Sometimes at one point you may not actually make sense out of it, but we try to ask you what you read about it, how do you understand it, how do you picture what is reflected in the ink blot, right? Now the test taker is asked to interpret each of the blots. The psychologist shows a card with a black and white or color blot and asks, what might this be? Of course, the thing that comes out from your mind, from your unconscious, will be the one that will be blurted out, will be told to the examiner. And of course, this could always be subjected to Barnum's effect also, no? Now, there is probably some truth in the assumption that personality influences behavior in very ambiguous situation. Your unconscious will always dictate on what you are going to do and how you are going to interpret things that are going on around you. Now, the degree of accuracy of any interpretation of responses is hard to gauge. The interpretation is subject to the interpretation of the person who is conducting it. Like for me, you're going to take the Rothschild's and black test. When I'm going to give it to you, I would always interpret that based on my understanding on that personality test that was given to you. Moving on. The Rothschild's ink blot test is a way to manage a system for interpreting and scoring the test. No, there is always way. And there is always standardized interpretation. We call that as norm. The most widely used one was developed by Dr. James Ixner. So we use that in order to interpret what you read. Let's say we're going to show you the ink blot, then you're going to identify that. We will not debate on you. You just say what do you have in mind, and we take note of that. And based from what we take note, this is the basis also of our interpretation. All right? So this is actually how complex it is in psychology. You know, as a dentist to be, you're not going to utilize all these tests. But the thing is, most of the time, your judgment will be in accordance with your experiences. So sometimes we misread people. This is exactly some problem that we may actually have. But the moment you have a very clear understanding about this, the moment that you will be able to identify what type of personality you have as a person, in fact, you may always reflect that to another person by way of understanding what they are and who they are. Okay, the Rothschild's ink blot is culturally limited. That may not be used to generalized populations, and the correlations among interpretations made by different clinicians would not always be strong because, as I mentioned to you earlier, the interpretations may be varied. The interpretations may be different from one another. That is the main point here. Okay? So, moving forward, now the Exner system scales don't have sufficient validity as the rest of the personality test that we conduct. We always claim that there is reliability and there is validity. What's the meaning of this? Every item that is included in the test has some meaning, has some purpose. And the questions are reliable because it measures what is supposed to measure. It's valid also the same way because it will actually give you a very good reading about the type of personality that the person who is taking the test will actually display. so that it will guide all the psychologists who will give the test. And anyway, usually there will always be some mistakes here. There will always be some problems in this case because maybe the interpretation that psychologists may actually have will differ. Just like doctors. That's why in doctors, if you're going to see doctors, especially when they're going to make diagnosis, a very big diagnosis, sometimes you ask second opinions. Psychologists also will be subjected to that. Maybe the interpretation of one psychologist will be different from your interpretation. So it is always possible because most of the personality tests that we give are not exactly objective, are not exactly accurate. But at least somehow it will help us on the basic understanding of who and what our patients are. All right. So moving forward, some critics think that the ROS charts should be discontinued because it doesn't give any validity at all, any sense at all. But somehow other psychologists who are holding on to it would always tell you that it's very useful so that you can always look into the unconscious. So this is exactly the main point. The moment you are actually going to interpret what is in the drawing, what is in the ink blots, your unconscious will always come out. You know that our unconscious would always dictate our behavior if we are going to base our interpretation on the concept of Sigmund Freud. You see? Especially our unconscious would always be influenced by repressed emotions that we otherwise would have forgotten. These are the negative experiences that are always dumped in the unconscious that would always come out eventually without us knowing it. So that's why the ink blot would always trigger that. It will always give you what your unconscious would have. Now, other clinicians feel that it is useful as a way to start a dialogue with the client. This is the main point. The reason why we are going to give psychological tests is just because we really would like to find out who you are, maybe at least a glimpse or an understanding what is inside your mind. As I said earlier, also in the earliest part of our class, we cannot read the mind of an individual. That's very impossible. We can only look into the manifestation of what is in the mind. And what are these manifestations? Either through studying the behavior of a person or through psychological tests that would be given to that person. That is the only window that we could access the unconscious of a person. We cannot just look into the brain of a person. We can only access that by giving personality tests. This is actually the main point that we actually have here. You understand? You have any questions so far? Now, the limitations that we have in this test is very considerable, substantive. That means to say, other psychologists have discarded this. But some of the psychologists that we may have today, especially those who are old, are still using this because they're very comfortable with this. Now, I'm telling you, reading the mind and looking into the unconscious of an individual would always be very difficult among psychologists. So we are devising a way in order to look into that, at least to peep, to look into the mind of the person, so that we have something to look into, so that we have something to start with. As a psychologist, it's very difficult to do. No? So we have to look into that so that we will be very helpful to our patients. This is exactly the main point here. No? Another test that would be given to the patient would be the thematic perception test. Now, what is actually the meaning of this? This is another personality test that can be given to the patient. This is based on the presentation of a series of pictures to the test subject. So it will not be given as a group. It will be given individually, and sometimes very laborious because if you're going to test 10 people, you need to have 10 hours to do that. No? The subject is prompted to create a story for each picture. Well, I'm going to give you a picture and make a story out of it. Now, the reason why we are actually asking you to do that is just because we really would like to ask you on what you are thinking currently at that particular moment. Now, the underlying assumption is that the story told is actually about the test takers. That means it's about you. Everything is about you. You see, you show a picture, you're going to interpret what is in the picture, make a story out of it, and then somehow you are actually bringing out the truth in you, the story that you want to tell, the story about yourselves, among others. In that way, we as test givers or psychologists would always take note of and would always understand. We would like that, no? Because we would be able to identify your preferences. We would be able to identify what are the things that you have in mind as of the moment. So that again, we have something to start with. Now, as a psychologist and a counselor, we need to start from somewhere. Now, that is exactly what we are going to teach on the next topic that I'm going to start next meeting. Okay? So, there is no systematic, widely used method for interpreting the stories. Now, the interpretation again would always be subjective to the interpreters, to psychologists. So, the interpretation may be different one way or another from each psychologist. See? The interpretation may be different or substantially different from one another. So, this is actually the problem here, no? Now, it's very difficult to do research on the reliability and validity of the test. We could have told that, of course, at the earlier time of its inception and development, psychologists would have thought that it's reliable and it's valid. So psychologists would use that, psychologists would give that. But right now, I think it's very difficult to look into the reliability and its validity also. Now, research results suggest that reliability and validity of this procedure are very, very weak in any way somehow. Now, these are some of the less commonly used projective techniques that we will use in testing an individual. The implicit personality test. No, somehow I do not also encounter this anymore in textbooks, but nevertheless, I'm actually giving it to you. This is already archaic, as we call it, no? This test assumes that aspects of personality beyond a person's awareness can be measured in the realm of metaphysics. No, it's unclear if this assumption is sturdy enough to justify widespread use of such procedure. So it will be very difficult. No, really, psychologists would always think that we can measure something that is beyond the patient. That is metaphysical belief, that is religious belief, among others. So somehow it's very difficult to do. All right? We have also the emotional stroke test. Although we have known that the subject of emotion is very, very, let's say, it's considered by so many psychologists, no? In fact, they came out with emotional quotient, they came out with so many tests. But as I can say again, this may not be valid at all, no? So the test requires a person to look at the list of words and see the color of the ink in which the word is printed. So we are going to interpret the choice of the color and the stroke. The most common test that we give is what we call as the house tree person. You see, we ask the individual to draw. We are, as the patient is drawing, we have to observe on how he chooses the color that he would actually use. And at the same time, we're going to look into the firmness of how he draws. And then also maybe write something. So some of the words represent possible sources of concern or anxiety at that. No? So the assumption is that the task will be more difficult when trying to say the color of the words that relate to areas of concern. So we look at that. No? The other personality tests that is implicit that are not used right now, but at least you should know is the implicit association test. That is, the assumption behind the test relates to priming. That is something that's actually coating, sugar coating. That is, the subject responds faster to the categories that combine a particular topic with pleasant or unpleasant words. So the responses will be dependent on your perception about how pleasant the word that you're going to use or how unpleasant it is. Like in the case of positive words, good or bad, among others. Now, one advantage of this technique is that it is hard to fake good or malinger. So it will actually tell you what it's supposed to tell. No? Now, look at this way. No, the uses and misuses of personality tests. We give the test. So psychologists would actually give that, and we have something to use. We do not read the personality of an individual. We need to have a basis to understand that individual. That is our main point. That is how we use it. No, the personality test should be used cautiously. It will not be used by anyone except psychologists and the test takers. Now, if you're going to look at Facebook this time in the internet, there are so many personality tests that are actually coming out. What is the purpose when you're going to take the test? When you take a personality test, there should be a purpose. That's why we are always reminding: if you are a test taker, be cautious. If you are a test giver, be cautious, because the one that you are actually picking up, the one that you are reading, may not be true at all. Maybe subjected to Barnum's effect or fake, may not tell anything about the patient, because totally the answer of the patient may be the opposite or his opposite. No, so the patient could have been subjected to Barnum's effect. Personality tests are useful as part of interviewing and rapport building and as part of the process of personality assessment. You see, if you're going to apply to a job in a workplace, most of the time, I do not know if that we are doing this in the United Arab Emirates, but in my country and the United States, we are always giving 3 types of tests: the personality test, the IQ test, and the projective test. Why is it that we actually give this? No? Number 1, personality test. We really would like to give it to you because we should have a glimpse on who you are and what you want. If we are going to hire you, you are not going to fight with anyone or with most of the people in the workplace. So that's the reason why we give personality tests. We should have an idea or be given an idea on who you are. IQ test also, we need to make it sure that you should know how to follow instructions. That's exactly the point. Now, in the factory, we do not want to go to genius. We really would like to go on average, because average people that is an IQ of 100, IQ of 100 is the average person. They can learn things. We can teach them. That is actually the purpose. We give also projective tests because we are going to make it sure that when we are going to hire employees, they are not sick mentally. There is no pathologic conditions. So that is the main point now. So if you're going to look at the purpose of personality tests, okay, it will improve the selection and accuracy of our employment decision. Okay, because employing a person requires time and money, especially for training purposes. No, if you're going to hire people, you have to train them. So at least for 6 months. Then before they will be very productive again. That is it, no? All right. Now, if you're going to look at this, no? Now, among our populations overall, we have 1% to have schizophrenia, no? Then people without schizophrenia, 95%, people with schizophrenia, and so on and so forth, no? So these are the type of people that we may actually have in our midst. We do not know even in our group if people are actually suffering, may actually have some sort of pathologic condition, they may not actually survive the situation that they are actually into right now, so they cannot survive becoming a student among others. This is very helpful. But before you're going to make some sort of damage, if you're going to give personality test, at least we're going to weed you out. We'll be able to profile you, we'll be able to understand you, we'll be able to know what to do with you. That's exactly the main point, no? So personality tests can be used in criminal profiling, just like what the CIDs are doing, no? The Criminal Investigation Department, the United Arab Emirates, the CIA, and the FBI. FBI are very well known in profiling the nationals. CIA, they profile the nationals of other countries, among others. So it's very useful because we are actually given basic understanding on what we have. And Dr. Victoria, I have to finish first my class. I'll call you later. 5 more minutes here. So now the profiles produced in these efforts differ little from those members of general and non-criminal public, among others. All right. Personality test is a long, complex process to measure. Everything worth knowing about an individual's personality must always be considered. No, we will not always be dependent on the answers of an individual, but somehow will be dependent also on how we observe individuals. That's why it's very important that when we are going to give personality tests, it will be individual. We will be able to observe how the individual takes the test. We'll be able to observe the movements, their behaviors, among others, so that we will be able to have an accurate reading about the type of personality that they have. No, the tests that are employed as part of personality assessment should only be used in limited fashion. It will not somehow test and define who you are and what you are. Let's say if the result of the MBTI will say that you are introverted, judgmental type of person, you cannot claim that I am this, I am that. It will be just a suggestion of who you are and what you are, so that it will actually give you an opinion on what kind of person you are, so that you will be able to know how to deal with yourselves and how you're going to deal with other people also. No, it's easy to draw strong conclusions based on weak data. So the collected data that we have out of the personality test would always be weak, not so strong. You see, that is actually the main point here. That's why reading the personality type of an individual would always be very difficult. No, somehow we psychologists would have difficulty coming out to terms with one another in order to have a very good understanding on the type of personality that we have on our patients. Nevertheless, I'm going to use this knowledge of personality in the exploration on our next topic, which we call counseling, psychology, and psychotherapy. Okay? So with that, we end our topic today. We end the lengthiest portion of our class because, as I believe, personality is the lengthiest and the most important part of our psychology class. Our class is general psychology, basically. So at least a person, you as a dentist to be, may have a glimpse or a little understanding of the different type of people that you are going to encounter. You see, your knowledge about personality may help you in order to deal with your patients individually in the future. Okay? So, is there any question that you would like to ask? If there are no questions, so I will include personality in the makeup CA. And then I'm going to finalize, as I mentioned to you earlier, this afternoon when I'm going to send an email to all of you. By the way, there is a new student that we have here So we welcome him. No, it's Salma, is it? No, something like that. No, so we welcome him. Hopefully, he's going to stay with you also for a while. With that, we end the class today. We have to meet again this coming Monday. All right. So we start with our counseling. Okay. If you have no question, then please write present, your ID number, and then you're good to go in the message board. Okay. Uh, have a very good weekend, everyone.
Guys, someone stop the record.